Hello and welcome to Module 4 of the EstimatorXpress Skills course. In this final video we're going to be looking at the remaining options that are within the estimate. Well, to start off by having a quick look at the Address, Profit and Inflation tab, and then we're going to go into more detail on the bar chart, the reports and of course the customer quote. So to start off with, whilst in our estimate, we're just going to have a quick look at these last three tabs, starting with the Address tab. You will see that there are space for two addresses. On the left hand side is your client's address, and on the right hand side, to start off with, is a repeat of the client's address. You can then change this if the site address is going to be different, not an unusual format if you're dealing with someone who has multiple properties and they want you to work on one of their properties. You can also use the screen to edit and change the data had you not typed in the correct address when you created the estimate. The Profit tab allows you to adjust those profit markup figures. So you may create the quote, find that the figure is too high or too low. You can return to this tab, adjust these figures, and then recreate your quote. And the last tab is the inflation one. Again, if you're going to apply inflation to the quote, you can readjust these figures in here. Okay, so let's return back to our summary page. Okay, so now we want to go and have a look at the bar chart. So to do this, click on the Chart tab, and this will open up the chart screen. You will also see that we have a pop-up box entitled Edit Bar Chart. So the first thing we're going to do is actually close this box down because we don't want to edit the bar chart quite yet. There's a few other things I want to show you first. So you'll now see quite a substantial bar chart. So first a quick look at what we can see on screen. On the left side you can see a list of build phases. Across the bottom you can see a date. Typically this will be every 4 weeks. At the top will be your company name and a statement that the bar chart is for a particular type of job, but in this case it will be an extension. Now the first thing that you may have noticed is that we have an awful lot of build phases here, and many of these build phases are ones that you've not actually done any estimating for. So the first thing we need to do is to clean up the chart by removing the unused build phases. So this is a button on the top menu, so if we click on this, we will get a pop-up asking us to confirm which build phases are to be removed. We will click on Yes. So we now have a much smaller chart, and we can now start working on this to customize it for the job. So to alter the bar chart, we now need to bring up the Edit Bar Chart box that we closed down a few moments ago. So on the top menu there's a button entitled Edit Bar Chart. Click on this and the Edit Bar Chart box appears. Now on some screens this box and the calendar box here can partially disappear off the bottom of the screen. So just to quickly show you, if you click your mouse and hold it down on the title bar, you can move this around. And with the calendar, which we'll look at in a moment, this is the same. Hold your mouse down on it and you can move it up or down. Sometimes these boxes will appear and you can't see the buttons at the bottom. Okay, so what can we see in this box? First, we have the calendar icon where we can actually change the start date of the estimate. You'll see at the moment my start date says the 8th of February 2016. It could well be that we have now firmed up a start date with our client and they've said that they're looking to start this job sometime in June. So I'm going to click on my calendar here, click on the drop down for the month, change it to June, and let's find the first Monday in June. That would be sensible. And click OK. And you'll now see that my first date on the bar chart has changed to the 6th of June. In the main section of the Edit Bar Chart box we can control the start date and the duration of build phases to suit the project. The start date of a build phase, whether it's in week 1, week 2, week 3, etc., is to the left side of the box. And the duration of the build phases is on the right side over here. And in the centre you can see where we have a drop down for selecting the build phases. These are controlled by using the up arrows to make things longer or shorter, or move the start week left or right. You cannot physically drag the bars on the screen. On the right hand side we have several options. First one is to add bars. If I click on this, you can see that this lists other build phases. Now it may well be that whilst you have not estimated a particular build phase, you may want it to be in the schedule of works because there could be a third-party contractor is going to be performing that task and you still want to see where that fits into the job. So you could, for example, have a scaffold in here which is being supplied by a third party, and you could add erect scaffold into the build phases, for example. So you would select erect scaffold and that would then appear in your job. Now we're actually going to remove that because we don't want it for this particular job, but just to show you that you can drop things in if needed. The zoom button allows you to zoom in on a particular part of the chart by date. For example, we might want to have a look at the build phases that are occurring in September and October. So we can click on zoom and say that we want to look at our data from the 1st of September. To the end of October. So I put in the start and the end date and then click on the zoom button. This now gives me a bar chart for that specific time frame. I can then print this, etc. To reset this, I simply click on the refresh button. Filter bars allows you to remove bars and only show particular ones you want. So you might just want to look at, say, these 4 bars, select them and then click the select button. Again, that will show you these durations. This might be handy if you want to send out different parts of the build schedule to different subcontractors. Again, to reset this, click on refresh. The refresh button, as you have seen, resets the chart to show it in its entirety. The other thing it will also do is if we alter the start date of a particular build phase to happen after one of the subsequent build phases, when you click refresh, it will actually move it back into the correct position according to date. The cascade button over here will move subsequent build phases left or right after you have moved a particular build phase. This will become more obvious in a minute when we go through a few exercises. Now, assuming you've been following the course, you will have site acquisition and design build phases at the top of your chart, and I've also got an erect scaffold build phase at the top of my chart. These quite often appear in your build plan if you put in a lot of the preliminary costs because they are assigned to the design phase and the site acquisition build phase. For your build plan, you may not want these on your chart, so we can remove these. So this is very simple. We select the build phase that we don't want from our drop down in the middle, and the design phase, which is the first one we want to get rid of, is already selected. And we move to the right hand side and we click on the down arrow, and this makes the build phase shorter until it is gone. We can then click on the next build phase we want to get rid of. So click on the drop down and choose site acquisition. Again, set the duration to 0. And I also want to get rid of that scaffold that I just added in. So I'll click on my drop down, go to erect scaffold and set the duration to 0. Once I've done all that, I then want to remove these from the chart, so I click on the refresh button. So we now have the site set up as our first build phase, but obviously this is now starting sometime in September and we want this to be in June. So what we now need to do is move our site setup as our first build phase all the way to the left so it is in the first week of the job. So from the build phase drop down in the middle of the screen, select site setup. At this time we're going to go to the arrows on the left hand side and change our start week, which at the moment is week 16, and make this week 0, which is the first week. Once this is over here, we can now click on the cascade button to pull all the other build phases in line with the first one. And to complete the process, we now click on refresh. This process will also work if you move or extend a build phase to the right. So just to give you an example, I'm just going to move my brickwork shell to the right. I'm going to make it start in week 4, and then I'm going to click on Cascade, and you'll see that everything else moves to the right. And I can hit a refresh to finish that, and of course I can then reverse that process. Now, as well as moving the start dates of build phases, we can also alter the duration of any build phase to make it longer or shorter. So for practice, we can alter the brickwork shell build phase to take a bit longer. So in the Edit bar chart box, go to the build phase drop down and select the brickwork shell, which I already have here. Now go to the week option under where it says duration, and alter the duration to 3 weeks. And let's add a few days in there, so let's say 3 weeks and 3 days. You'll see that the build phase for brickwork shell has extended. Now click on the Cascade button. You'll see that everything else is now moved to the right, and again click on refresh to finish. You would then repeat this process through the various build phases to make them longer or shorter to suit the actual estimate in question. Remember that the chart does not take data from the estimate, so you need to use your knowledge of the job, plus also one of the reports which I'm going to show you later, which shows you our estimated construction times, to create a build schedule which you think is suitable for the job. Once you've done this, it's very useful. Firstly, it adjusts all the dates for the start and end of build phases, which will affect all date-based reports. Secondly, it then gives you a nice build schedule to follow. And also, because this is quite a clean chart, it's a very good presentation tool. You could print this out and supply it along with your quote when you're talking to your customer about trying to close the business. Because most of the time a customer's first question is how much, and their second question is how long. Being able to demonstrate that with a nice clear chart, again, is a very impressive and professional presentation. Right, so now we've finished with the chart, let's go back to our summary screen. Okay, so next let's have a look at our reports. Click on the Reports tab. When you click on Reports tab, you may be given a prompt that tells you some of your bar chart build phases will be added back to the chart. If you do get that, just click on OK. So the reports are split into 3 sort of sections. At the top we have sort of pie charts and bar chart type information. And then the second and third sections are all sorts of data. The pie charts and the bar charts at the top, let's just have a quick look at one. These are very graphical and pretty, and the sort of thing that you might use to present to your managing director or to a bank or shareholders, that kind of thing. And most of these have a toggle option so you can switch between a percentage or a cash value. And they're all very good and pretty. For the most small builders, probably not so interesting, but just so you know that they are there in case you need that kind of data. Right, so what we're going to do is look at several of the reports. I'm just going to highlight their use. I would strongly recommend that you spend time going through all the data reports just to get an understanding of the sort of information that is available for you to use. By using these reports, you will improve the efficiency of your business. In different ways, these give you information to help you become more efficient and more profitable. So let's have a look. The first report we're going to look at is sales price including profit. So open this report. And you'll see here in this report it gives us our item costs by build phase and then the total. It also gives us our wastage costs, total including wastage, and then it also gives us a profit figure, and then finally this will be your sales price to your client excluding VAT. So it's a good way of getting a snapshot of the major money figures involved in the job. You'll make use of this profit figure to help you in your negotiation, and I'm going to talk about that slightly later. Okay, let's come out of this report. By the way, that report there had no zero values in it because I've already used a function here called delete zeros. When you click on this option, It removes all items that have a zero quantity and makes your reports a lot cleaner, so it's a handy one to use. So before you start looking at your data, click on delete zeros and then remove resources with a quantity of 0. We have several reports here which look at detailing the costs of particular trades. So for example, let's look at the plastering costs. And you can see here the labourers for a particular trade, the tasks and the costs involved. And you can apply this to all sorts of trades, and this is very handy because it means that you've now got an idea of what you should be paying your plasterers, for example. And if your bill to your plasterers is a lot higher than this, it means that there is something going wrong. Either you've estimated the job incorrectly, you've got the wrong labour rates for your plasterers, or if you're paying your plasterers on a day rate, maybe they're working slower than they should. And a lot of people can actually make use of this report to make sure that your day rate labourers work at the correct speed. The software will tell you how long a job should take. You can then inform your labourers who are on day rates that that's how long you expect them to take to build the job, and if they take longer, you're not going to pay them. So it's a very good way of controlling day rate labourers, and you soon find that they work a little bit quicker. Okay, so once we're finished with that, click on Close Report. And the next report we're going to look at is Costs by Resource. This gives us a breakdown of various different types of costs, labour, material, plant, subcontractor and sundry, just to give you a top end figure so you can see where your money is going. Okay, once you're happy with that, again click on Close Report. And now we're going to look at one of the fundamental reports that I say you should look at for every single job. It is the cash flow report. This shows you your outgoings for the job. The chart is date-based, so it requires that you do have a reasonably accurate chart prior to using this report. If you have not already manipulated your chart, you'll find that when you come in here, your dates will be all over the show. So make sure you've done the chart first before you look at any reports which are date-based. The due dates here are approximate dates where you'll have to be paying for materials or labour. So it gives you a good idea of when you're going to need cash from your client to cover your outgoings. Okay, so let's close this report. And the next report we're going to look at is another cash forecasting report. This is the profit forecast report. Okay, so this will show you your profit as you're working your way through your job, and at the bottom it will give you a grand total. Remember that this is a gross profit figure. If you remember back to earlier on, when we were in the earlier modules, I was talking about how a typical small builder, the first 15% of your markup will actually be eaten up in your company's fixed costs. So on my job here, I've set a 30% markup, so I've got a nice split there. The first 15% disappears in gross costs, the second 15% becomes my net actual profit. So if I apply that maths here, I have £6,200 approximately gross profit, so I could say that that's a net profit of £3,100. What that means is if your client asks you to knock £3,000 off the price of the job, if you agree to that, you are effectively making pretty well no net profit on the job. Okay, and that's fine. That might be something that you want to do because you need the business. However, knowing that means that you can then take control of your costs. Because you know you're not going to make a profit on the job, you won't then go and buy some equipment that you don't necessarily need to buy at that time. Okay, you will wait till you have a job where you're making sufficient profit to cover this. By having this information to hand prior to negotiating with your client, what it does mean is that you will be better informed about your break-even and your profit figures, so you'll be far less likely to agree to a price that could lead to a loss, and you will negotiate better and become more profitable by knowing where your profit margin actually lies. A lot of builders get to the end of the year, think they've made a profit, and it's only when your accountant tells you you haven't made a profit that you then start wondering why. and often it's because you've actually negotiated beyond your break-even point. Use this report to know what your exact profit is, and then make sure that you always negotiate to make a profit. Okay, so once you're happy with that, close the profit forecast report. So a quick tip on this as well. On the EstimatorXpress main menu, there's an option called My Projects. This allows you to link estimates together and create data from multiple jobs. So one good example would be to link all the estimates from jobs over the next 12 months. You can then create a combined profit forecast report, or a combined cash flow report, or a combined materials report. If you created a combined profit forecast report, you would then actually see what your profit forecast would be for the next 12 months, for example. With that information, you could then make decisions on the business, such as expanding to take on more employees, or maybe buying some new equipment, a digger or a van, etc. If the profit isn't enough to cover that, you would then not make those decisions. Most businesses would love to have the ability to forecast the profits for the next year. And it's a great way of being able to manage your business efficiently and expanding, if you want to, at the correct rate, or seeing what your profits will be to pay for some costs that you may be expecting. Okay, so the next report we want to look at is the labour time schedule. Now this report shows you the build phases and the duration of the labourers for the build phase. And this is a report that we use to help you make your bar chart. So you would print this out or put it into Excel. You would then go into your bar chart and you would modify the duration of the build phases to roughly match the durations we have here. Obviously you would apply your knowledge of the job, and you may take into account to allow longer for certain build phases if, for example, access to the site is very awkward, or you may know that some people are going to have holidays, for example. It could be that we've got here a 2-in-1 gang, you've only got a 1-in-1 gang, so you will extend the duration of this by 1/3, for example. So you'll use this to help you make the bar chart. As I said before, once you've made your bar chart, that then affects the reports such as profit forecast or cash flow, because they are based on the dates in the bar chart. Okay, so let's close this report. Next report, there's two we're going to have a quick look at. There's plant task list, which shows you roughly by date when you're going to need plant. And there's a plant used task list, which shows you by build phase when you're going to need plant. So whichever one you prefer, that will give you a list of the plant required in your job, so you can make sure that you have things that you don't own ordered on time. For example, if you've got to hire skips, mini diggers, etc., strong boys, acro props, you may have to hire those, so you will have forward notification of when you need those to make sure that they are on site on time. Okay, so let's close that report. And the next report we're going to look at is materials used, and again this is a very, very important report. Now this report lists your required materials by build phase. I'm going to use this report to look at how you can also tweak these reports to suit your needs, and a couple of options in here. Before we do, a few words about what I would use this report for. Now, the typical builder tends to go to see the merchant 3 or 4 times a week, and each time you do this, on average, you probably waste about 2 hours of your time. So each week you probably end up spending the equivalent of a full day dealing with your merchant. To give a rough analogy of this, would you spend a day of your life each week at the local shops buying your food? I suspect the answer would be no. And it should be the same when you're dealing with your merchant. There are of course circumstances that can force you to go to the merchant on an ad hoc basis, but if you effectively plan your material orders, you can significantly reduce the amount of time that you spend at the merchant. This time can then be used for tasks which will make you more money, such as finding new clients, estimating, selling, project managing, or maybe just playing golf if that's your thing. Okay. If you're at the merchant, you're wasting time, essentially. To give a rough idea, when we questioned some builders in London about how long they spent at merchants in a week, and then we did a quick bit of maths, we all came back with a figure that they probably wasted approximately £10,000 a year of their time dealing with merchants. Okay, so how do we make this report work for us? You can see here that we have the build phases, we have our material quantities, so we have all the data that we need to create an order. So you can export this report into Excel by using the Export Report button at the top here. Once this is in Excel, you can then round up or round down your order quantities to suit. And what you can then do is on the right hand side in Excel, you could add the delivery dates for when you want products delivering to your site. Obviously, there is the caveat that you need to have somewhere to be able to deliver, and there may be some circumstances where you can't do that and you do just have to go to the merchant regularly. But if you can have materials delivered, why would you go to the merchant more than once, maybe a month, to do this? So you could give the merchant your next 4 to 8 weeks delivery schedule, for example, and then partway through that, then give them the next few weeks delivery schedule, and maybe go in and see your merchant once a month, or maybe just once a week, okay? Whichever you do, as long as you're not going 3 or 4 times a week, you're saving yourself a huge amount of time and effort. By being on the site or by not being at the merchants, you'll be running your site more efficiently, or you'll be making more money because you'll be finding more business and doing something that's actually effective for your business, not just managing materials. Right, so now I've explained a bit more about how you can use this report to save you a lot of time and money. Let's look at how we can change things around with the report. So first I'm just going to highlight a few things here. You'll see that the top of the columns have headings. So I've got a build phase heading here and a description heading here. And at the top here we have a list. Now these are also column headings, they're just not in this report. And you can add these into a report, or you can remove column headings from a report. So for example here, I could click on my build phase. I'm going to hold down my left mouse on the column heading. You see I've got a 4-way cross. I'm holding my mouse down. I'm now going to drag it up into this list and drop it. We've now removed it from the list and we now have just a total list of materials. I can reverse that process, so I could get my build phase, drag it down here. You'll notice that when I move it there's a fuzzy line, so you probably can just see on the very edge of my screen I've got a fuzzy line. So if I let go here, it puts my build phase back. Or I could also put my build phase after my materials, so that way I could show a product and what build phases it's going to be used on. So by altering the order of the columns, you can actually alter the way the data is presented. You also have options up here. You can see that resources, at the moment this report is only talking about materials because it's a material report. But just for example purposes, I can show you that I could now add in labour. I'll remove that. So you can make different reports by pulling things in and out. I could remove my build phase, and I could use my reference, which is my location. I could pull that down to the start. This then shows me locations and then shows me materials for locations. So there's lots of different ways that you could alter this data. Okay, so let's come out of this report. The next thing I want to show you is that now we've modified our materials used report, I've made a little bit of a mess of it. If I want to set it back to how it was, I highlight materials used, and on the top menu I click on this button that says delete reset report. It asks me to confirm if I want to reset it, and I say yes. Okay, our last section is the quote wizard for creating your customer quotes. To get to this, on the top menu, click on the Customer Quotes button and select Quote Wizard by Build Phase. This will give you a footings example. This does not necessarily mean there is a footing in your job, it just uses this image as an example to show what your quote will look like with different options switched on or off. So to start on the left hand side, we can have no resources, key resources, or all resources. You can have it with or without phase totals, and you can have it with or without build phase pictures. If this quote was going to a domestic client, you should always have the picture on, as this is a subliminal message to them and gives them an attachment to the job in question. There is an option for sales price including inflation, customer friendly descriptions, and then the controversial option, which is order quantities. Now, a lot of people are fearful of having order quantities on their quote, but my advice to you is that you should always have the order quantities on your quote. Why would you hide information from the customer? You are more likely to win the job if you have the order quantities. If you are fearful that the client will then use that to show to another builder to help them create a quote based on yours, don't forget that you can print the quote as many times as you like. So you can print a copy that has the order quantities on it and show that to your client and go through it with them. And you could print a second quote without the order quantities, and that would be the copy that you would leave behind with your client. Now, before we click on print, let's have a look at a few of the options within the quote wizard. Click on more and then click on preferences. And then let's have a look firstly at the page setup. At the top you can see that you can adjust your fonts and font sizes for various sections of the quote. Underneath you can select a company logo. This needs to be a JPEG or a bitmap. I will choose a general picture for mine. And underneath here is an option where you can add a letterhead to your quote. Down at the bottom there's an option to have your contact details at the top of every page. I cannot think of any reason why you would not do this. And these details will be those that are on the top right hand corner of the main menu of EstimatorXpress, so make sure that they are your correct details, spelt correctly with the correct address. Underneath this is an option to show or hide the page numbering, and also a statement that says that the quote was created using EstimatorXpress. A lot of builders like to leave this on the quote because they can explain to the client that the estimate was created using a computerized system and is therefore highly accurate. Other builders prefer not to have this on so that they can explain to the client that they have spent many hours slaving over this quote. Once you've got the options that you're happy with, click OK. On this screen we can now alter our opening paragraph on the quote. So if we click on Edit Text, if you find that there are words in here that you would prefer to have, you can add in your words, take away what you don't like, and then save this as a new default paragraph for the start of your quote. Once you're happy with it, click OK. And again, there is a closing paragraph at the end of your quote. To start off with, we just have a blank one that says Terms and Conditions. If you already have a Terms and Condition document written up, you could copy and paste its contents into this box and save it, and it would then automatically print out with your quote, thus saving you time. Underneath this is an option to edit the text for each build phase. If I click on here to edit the brickwork shell build phase text, this is the default text which will appear in the quote whenever a brickwork shell is involved in the job. Again, you can change the words in here, so there may be some additional information that you would always like to explain whenever you have brickwork shell, for example. You can also change the picture here. You can click on this little button and you can then choose a different picture of a wall, or you might have a very good photograph of a wall. Bearing in mind that when you do this, it will print out about the size of a postage stamp on the quote, so the picture needs to be very clear and it needs to be quite bright. If you have a dark photograph of a wall that's 20 meters away, it's not going to be a very good example. Once you've set these, click OK. Right, so now we can click OK to go back to our main screen, and we can click on the Print button. You'll see that you have various VAT options, VAT-free, typical VAT at 20%, or an option to actually type in a pound note value of VAT. For today's example, we're going to go with the middle option and click OK. So we now have our customer quote. On the opening page we have our client's home address and also the site address. In this case they're both the same. So because it's in Word, I can merely highlight these, select them and delete. I have my company logo, in this case a guitar, Obviously you would use a picture relevant to your company. And on page 2, if I had chosen a letterhead, it would be across the top of here, and here's my introductory letter with a place for you to sign. Then we get into the quote itself. You'll notice at the top of each page I have the company address, and at the bottom of the page the statement that the estimate was created using EstimatorXpress. The build phases appear in the order that they appear in your bar chart. So if you've modified the bar chart, you'll see the build phase order change in here. And because we're now in Microsoft Word, we can edit this as we would any other document. So I could click on a picture and delete it, and I can type where I want and add more words. Etc. Scrolling down towards the bottom, we have a page which has our total sales price, VAT, and total sales price including VAT. And then after that, you have 2 acceptance letters, a copy for you and a copy for your client, for both of you to sign and date. And right at the bottom, we have the closing paragraph, terms and conditions, which in my case is blank. You can save this, and you can then print it or email it to your client. And that is the end of Module 4.